G'day guys, we're going to look at oxalates and look at from a different angle than we usually do. I mean, normally when we're, oxalate dumping or stuff like that, we consider citric acid, and I have used citric acid in the past as well, and a number of other strategies where sometimes people will reintroduce certain oxalate foods to stop the dumping or ease the dumping or stuff like that. And while that has some, validity in terms of actually citric acid, food grade citric acid, breaking down those oxalates, and when it comes to sort of easing the actual dumping process, adding a bit of oxalate type related foods back in small amounts in order to moderate that. With this study, this is an old study. It's a clinical experiment. It is an animal study. Obviously, you can't do these on humans. It was in the magazine Metabolism and back in 1985, but it's a very interesting, nuanced in terms of these metabolites, the actual oxalate metabolites in that regard. So anyway, let's get into it, and I'll share the screen. So this was basically in volume, it's 10, 20, 30, 34, number 2, it's Roman numerals, as people know. This was back in February 1985, and there's a preliminary report here that was put together. It's a clinical experiment, the normalization of urinary oxalate by taurine in glycolate-fed rats. So feeding them glycolate to sort of increase the amount of oxalate that they actually produce and excrete. Oops. Now I've done it. God. Yes. Anyway, oral feeding of sodium glycolate, 50 milligrams, just quite a bit if you think about it, in day rat for 10 days. It's a very, it's a lot. That's a lot for a small rat, which is about 100 grams. It's a ginormous amount. So anyway, caused significant increases in oxalate and taurine excretion and a decrease in liver protein content. So not only did it increase the oxalate, but it also excreted taurine, which is a good thing. Glycolic acid oxidase levels and glycolic acid dehydrogenase levels as compared to normal untreated rats. Now, the other thing that they did was taurine, 100 milligrams a day on a rat. And the rat is about 100 grams. So we're talking about for a 70 kilo person, which is 154 pounds, we're talking about 70 grams of taurine, which is quite a lot. But also they're giving a very high dose as well, half, it's ginormous amount as well, which would be equivalent should be equivalent to 35 grams in an equivalent human. So that's quite a lot. Let's put it that way, in terms of you wouldn't physiologically normally ever consume that sort of level. So here we are, is adding something that will generate shitloads of oxalate, and let's see what taurine does. Does it normalize it, as they say? Oxalic acid, an end product of metabolism, is an important constituent of urinary calculi. In the body, oxalate, which can be synthesized from glycine, glycolate, glyoxalate, and ascorbate, which vitamin C, is excreted in urine without further modification. It has been shown by various workers that synthesis of taurine as an important end product of sulfur amino acid metabolism decreases in vitamin B6 deficiency. So if you've got a vitamin B6 deficiency, the synthesis of taurine goes down. That's the end product of sulfur amino acids, you know, the methionine, cysteine, taurine, that metabolic pathway, that sort of enzymatic pathway that actually brings about more taurine, has a dependency. This has to do with methylation as well, which B6 is a very important element to that, is determined in a sense by B6. So let's just quickly look at B6. So when we're looking at B6, pyridoxine, need about 1.7, which is the RDI. When we're looking at foods, salmon is pretty high. That's 100 grams. 100 grams is 3.53 ounces, just to be clear. So when it comes to, nearly, just slightly over, we'll ignore that, just slightly over 6 ounces, you will get basically nearly 100%. When it comes to chicken, it's about the same, just slightly less. We can ignore fortified tofu. These products are just basically and then lean pork is a pretty good when it comes to the ruminants that we're dealing with. And the monogastrics, pork and beef are sort of the ones that are there. They're not much different, I mean, we're talking about nearly 50% at 6 ounces. So you're looking at about 12, 13 ounces to basically get your requirements for the day, just for those that are on the metric system. For beef, you're looking at 368 grams, easy. Most carnivores consume much more than that. I do in particular. So of both these products, so I get more than enough for the day. So the majority of the products will tend to be animal products. We can also look at foods, high value, 100 grams, which is 3.53 ounces. So whole milk, 16-ounce glass, you get about 10%. one large egg, about 5%. So if you're having 4 eggs, it's about 20%. It's my favorite, brie. So about 4% in an ounce. I usually always have about 120 grams, divided by 28.3. That is about 4.23 ounces times 4. It's about nearly 17%, plus the 20, that's 37. So 4 eggs, the brie, and then so nearly and about 8 ounces, which is 230 grams, let's say, more or less. As you can see, a steak, a couple of eggs, some cheese. That's, and I haven't even added the milk that I have in the evening, stuff like that. Very easy to get it. I usually eat much more than that. I'm probably getting way over 150%. So it's a non-issue in a carnivore diet to get enough in that regard. So obviously on a plant-based diet, it's much more difficult to get sufficient. And there are a lot of people on a plant-based diet that do have B6 deficiencies. So they magnify. So not only do they have a high oxalate foods, not only that do they have too little taurine, plus on that, they undermine their own ability to biosynthesize from their own body, even the small amount, due to low B6 or even deficient levels of B6 that a lot of these plant munchers tend to have. So it's a well-known problem because even part of the methylation cycle, even when I've heard some of them that have picked up on the situation about riboflavin, supplement riboflavin, and can't actually fix properly the actual MTHFR issue completely. They do improve it, but they don't fix it completely. And it's because another element to that is B6. That riboflavin B6, it's not a massive amount of B6, but you still need a bit of B6 to support that enzyme with riboflavin to then basically increase the actual enzyme that is the folate B12 pathway. So that's another issue. Yes, for goons, yes. Missing out on another important nutrient or getting sub-levels of it. So basically what they did was, this is an Indian study, and they basically have used, rabbit muscle type stuff. And they've, a couple of other things which they've actually purchased from a number of these industries. And then they've used 15 male Wistar rats, each one of them 100 grams. And then they've administered they've had a group 1 rat left untreated to serve as control. So they have a control group, and they have a rat 2 group that orally administered 50 milligrams of sodium glycolate per day rat for 10 days. And the third group with the same amount of the oxalate-inducing substance and 100 milligrams of taurine, which is equivalent to a 70 kilo person, or that, of 70 grams. So it's very high doses of the 35 grams of the for an equivalent human, so which is a lot in terms of an element to cause, you know, because even in the diet you'd only get a very small amount in comparison, maybe a couple of grams, where 35 grams is an excessive amount. It'd be equivalent to basically literally consuming packs and packs of gelatin, things like that can actually produce in some people that are susceptible. So none of us are going to do that or consume those quantities. So, this is a sort of an extreme version to basically just illustrate how effective taurine is or isn't. Glycolate and taurine in aqueous solutions, a water solution, was given by gastric intubation once a day. Wonderful. They got it exactly through the gut, through an intravenous thing, whether they liked it or not. So, obviously, because you can't get them to consume it by drinking it or whatever like that, because you can't control the amount that they will ingest. So you have to put it into them. So I'm not going to go through all that sort of stuff. In the discussion part, taurine as an end product of sulfur metabolism was proposed to have a therapeutic role in internal bypass patients having hyperoxaluria. So they're trying to actually determine what's the best approach. Mechanism on this hyperoxaluria being glycine from glycolate. Glycine in the colon related to oxalate in the liver. Taurine, however, decreased the amount of glycine available for bile salts, thereby reducing oxalate and oxalate production. This beneficial effect, this is in a different study, was not confirmed, and later the bile salts originated hyperoxaluria theory was disproved, and it has shown that this syndrome represents enhanced absorption in preformed dietary oxalate. Glycolate precursor oxalate is present in various foods and beverages and leads to an increase in oxalate production. In the present study, glycolate and tea feeding had no effect on intestinal absorption of oxalate, as evident by the comparable uptake rate of oxalate in normal G-fed and GT-fed animals, thereby ruling out the role of dietary oxalate in glycolate-induced hyperoxaluria. So similar in vitro added taurine had no effect on oxalate in glycolate uptake. So there's a sort of amount, and they didn't really see that there is a massive amount. Obviously, that stuff will probably be more of an issue in the gut than anything else, but it doesn't seem to be getting into the circulation, which is quite interesting that they didn't see that. In vitro addition to glycolate has been shown to have no effect in normal animals, but decreased intestinal uptake of oxalate in vitamin B6 deficient animals. So that's interesting. Liver is the main site of the metabolism of glycolate to oxalate and oxalate. This reaction being catalyzed by peroximal enzyme GAD, prolonged feeding of glycolate has been shown to induce GAO levels. So it's more this enzyme gets upregulated, is what they're actually finding. The study of an alternative pathway, so it's not that other pathway, it's the sort of this enzyme. So it's more of an enzyme that actually then allows this to be taken and then converted in the liver. The study of an alternative pathway involving direct conversion of glycolate to oxalate without free oxalate via GAD indicates a pattern similar to GAO with G and GT feeding. Though the effects were less pronounced as compared to GAO. The drop in GAO and GAD levels observed in the present study follow. G feeding may be a consequence of higher metabolism of glycolate, as evident from 2.4-fold higher urinary oxalate excretion of G-fed rats as compared to control animals. So we see these ones that are actually getting this substance in are actually having much higher levels, 2.4-fold, which is quite significant in percentage terms. That's 340%. The decrease in liver protein content following G feeding is likely to be due to a reaction product glycoxylate. Pyruvic acid, a structural analog, gave similar effects. Okay. An overall decrease in liver protein, including enzyme protein, may be responsible for the observed decrease in the enzyme level. In female rats, GAO level 25%, males G-fed feeding for 1 month had no effect on liver GAO and GAD, and protein levels. Unpublished observations suggesting that it is the glycoxylate product produced from glycolate that may be responsible for the observed changes. The above metabolic effects of glycoxylate is prevented by simultaneous administration of taurine, as evident from the normal urinary excretion of oxalate, normal liver protein content, GAO and GAD levels in G plus in the glycolate plus taurine-fed animals. A 10-fold increase in taurine excretion after G feeding is suggestive of its interference with renal tubular transport and reabsorption of taurine. Throughout this need to be confirmed. So when you just give it the substance that actually causes oxalate, it actually seems to also cause a problem in the kidneys to reabsorb taurine. So this needs to be confirmed. The beneficial effects of taurine on glycolate induced hyperoxaluria explains the lack of glycolate effect on GAO in female rats, where the liver taurine levels are 2-fold higher than the males. So the females are actually producing much higher levels of taurine, seem to have less of this problem. It also appears likely that the higher levels of taurine in the liver offer resistance to the toxicity of oxalate precursors in female rats. Well, those ladies are lucky, aren't they, that compared to the male rats? Similarly, don't do that. Similarly, it is proposed that the decreased synthesis of taurine following pyridoxine deficiency, B6, may be rendering the animal susceptible to the toxicity of oxalate precursors. So what they're actually saying here, it may not be basically the actual the oxalate stuff that's actually causing. Obviously, if you eat massive amounts, the body's not going to be able to handle, but the small amounts that are coming from general food and all that, we're not talking about, you know, things like idiotic things like spinach smoothies. We're just talking about general sort of, you know, stuff that is in food that actually causes some oxalate. You know, as long as you don't have a B6 and a taurine deficiency, you don't see this. Maybe rendering the animal susceptible to the toxicity of the precursors. Thus, the preventative role of taurine in glycolate-induced hyperoxaluria has been demonstrated in this study. So it's a really interesting thing. And even this other study here that I've actually looked at, this is vitamin B6 depletion in man, urinary taurine and sulfate excretion and nitrogen balance. So a lot of these derangements that we see have really, when you look at all these sort of studies, they all, tryptophan, methionine, metabolism issues, a B6 deficiency. A lot of these are related to B6 deficiencies, and it's due to that methylation pathway, which, because methionine still has to be brought back from homocysteine back to methionine, and you've got the methylation pathways. This is all the nexus. The body's a complex, as I said, an organism that are interacting in complex ways, through all these pathways. Don't think reductionism, think that all these are interacting and interplaying every single second of your life. And so what you put in your mouth really has a profound effect how these systems in our body work, and work synergistically. So what we can see here is that a bit of oxalate being generated by normal metabolism, or even putting in precursors, trying to deliberately force to create a lot of oxalate. If you have enough of the two key elements, the B6 and the taurine in there, which basically means, are you eating enough animal flesh? Because that's what we're really talking about here. You will get those two. And then this oxalate issue will be far less pronounced. Or potentially, the general potential for oxalate just from the normal, we're not talking about here about excessive amounts like doing spinach smoothies. We're talking about just normal oxalate production that is done by a normal everyday eating and consumption and stuff like that. So this is where some people in just the mixed diets, the general diets, the ones that are not even eating these green leafy vegetables that are very high, are still getting kidney stones and all this. The reason why is because they are deficient in these key nutrients. So these key nutrients, if we ignore the extreme side of oxalate precursors like spinach and stuff like that, and we look and nuts like almonds and stuff like that, when we look at just general consumption, maybe a few almonds, certain foods that are slightly high in these precursors, if you've got enough B6 and taurine in the system, you can deal with them. You can excrete them. You can get rid of them without a lot of problems. But if you don't, if you have a deficient animal diet, that's when you get into trouble. And that's why it makes sense why back in the 1950s and 60s, when the diet, this is pre-refrigeration for most of the world, when the diet was primarily animal-based, 2/3, kidney stones and all these sort of things were less pronounced in the population. These sort of issues of oxalate stuff was less known. It was more an issue in the vegetarian and vegan communities and the hippie movements and those sort of groups back then. And it was only the naturopaths that sort of serviced these sort of communities that tended to basically be aware of this problem. It was really a problem of the lack of B6 and taurine. They were ignorant about that. So basically they just provided people with all these, let's say, Band-Aid solutions, take citric acid. Well, you can't take citric acid for the rest of your life. You need to get rid of those foods, and then you need to basically have sufficient of these precursors in animal foods that basically mitigate against this problem. So anyway, this was a new sort of take on oxalates from a different angle, from looking at the metabolism and looking the products that come out of metabolism, plus the elements, the taurine and the B6, which are very high in animal foods, that tend to mitigate this problem of normal oxalate production of human metabolism, and becomes a non-issue for carnies, where this can still be an issue for people on a plant-based diet or low carbohydrate diet. Anyway, hope you enjoyed that. See yous.